The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rugged mountains of Colorado Territory when Adelaide Whitaker stepped through the swinging doors of the Silverdale saloon, her heart pounding like a stampede against her ribs. It was 1875, and Silverdale was a town where fortunes were made and lost on gold claims, where men outnumbered women 20-1, and where a woman alone invited trouble just by existing. Adelaide straightened her spine as conversations hushed and heads turned toward her. She wasn't dressed like the painted ladies who worked the saloon. Her navy blue traveling dress was modest, if a bit dusty from the stagecoach journey. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her face. At 22, she still possessed the fresh-faced beauty of youth, but her eyes held the determination of someone who had seen enough hardship to last a lifetime. "Can I help you, miss?" The bartender's voice carried across the room, breaking the momentary silence. Adelaide swallowed hard and stepped forward. "I'm looking for Sheriff Caldwell. I was told I might find him here." A burly man at a corner table stood up, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "That'd be me, miss. What can I do for you?" She crossed the room, aware of the curious stares following her progress. "My name is Adelaide Whitaker. I've come from Boston to claim my uncle's property." "Jasper Whitaker? I was told he had a small ranch outside of town." The sheriff's expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked suspiciously like pity. "Miss Whitaker, I'm sorry to tell you, but your uncle passed on 3 months ago." Pneumonia took him fast. Adelaide felt the blood drain from her face. Uncle Jasper had been her last hope, her last living relative. But his property? Well now, that's a bit of a problem. Sheriff Caldwell gestured to a chair. "You might want to sit down." As Adelaide sank into the offered seat, she became acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. The sheriff continued in a lower voice. "Your uncle lost most of his land in a poker game about a year back. What was left barely covered his debts when he died." "I see." Adelaide's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. She had sold everything she owned to make this journey, believing her uncle's letters about the promising future that awaited her in Colorado. Now she was stranded, penniless, in a town where she knew no one. "I'm sorry, miss. If you need a place to stay tonight, Mrs. Holcomb runs a respectable boarding house. Excuse me," Adelaide interrupted, her gaze fixed on a poster tacked to the wall behind the sheriff. "Is that a dance? Tomorrow night?" The sheriff turned to look where she was pointing. "Yes, madam. Town social. Happens once a month." Adelaide's mind raced. She had taught dance and music in Boston to support herself after her parents died. Perhaps there was a way forward after all. "Thank you, Sheriff. I believe I'll take you up on that recommendation for lodging." As she stood to leave, a piano in the corner caught her eye. It was an upright model, well worn but sturdy. Without thinking, she walked over and ran her fingers lightly across the keys. "You play?" The gruff voice came from behind her. Adelaide turned to find a man watching her with open curiosity. He wasn't particularly tall, but there was a solid, capable quality to him. His face was weathered from the sun, deep lines etched around clear blue eyes that studied her with an unsettling intensity. His dark blonde hair was on the longer side, and though he wasn't dressed like a typical cowboy, the worn leather of his boots and the easy way he carried himself spoke of a life spent in the saddle. "Yes," she answered simply. "I was a music teacher in Boston." He nodded thoughtfully. "Name's Matthew Harding. I own the Double H Ranch north of town." "Adelaide Whitaker," she replied, offering her hand automatically as she would have done back east. He seemed surprised by the gesture but took her hand briefly. His palm was calloused, the grip firm but gentle. "You're Jasper's niece. You knew my uncle?" "Everyone knew Jasper," Matthew said with a slight smile. "Good man. Bad poker player." Adelaide couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips, despite the circumstances. "It seems I've inherited that particular family trait, poor judgment, that is." Matthew studied her for a moment longer. "Town could use a music teacher. Lots of families moved in this past year. Might be worth asking around. Before Adelaide could respond, the bartender called out, "Hey, Matt! Your usual?" Matthew tipped his hat to her. "Miss Whitaker. Welcome to Silverdale." With that, he turned and walked to the bar, leaving Adelaide with the first glimmer of hope she'd felt since stepping off the stagecoach. The following day, Adelaide secured a small room at Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house and spent the morning walking through town, introducing herself to families with children. By midday, she had arranged to give piano lessons to 3 different families, not enough to sustain her long term but a start nonetheless. That evening, as the town social approached, Adelaide changed into her best dress, a deep emerald green with modest lace trim at the collar and wrists. It was a bit formal for the occasion, perhaps, but it was all she had that might be suitable for a dance. The social was held in the town hall, a sturdy building that served multiple purposes for the community. When Adelaide arrived, lanterns were already lit, casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. A small band was setting up in one corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Adelaide recognized a few faces from her earlier introductions, and several mothers came over to speak with her about potential music lessons for their children. She was grateful for the distraction, for the chance to feel useful and productive, rather than adrift in a strange place. As the evening progressed, the band began to play, and couples moved on to the dance floor. Adelaide watched with a professional eye, noting the variations in style from what she was accustomed to in Boston. The dances were livelier here, less formal, though the basic steps remained the same. "Would you care to dance, Miss Whitaker?" Adelaide turned to find Sheriff Caldwell standing beside her, his hat in his hands. She smiled politely. "That's very kind of you, Sheriff, but I don't want to impose." "No imposition at all," he assured her, offering his arm. The dance was a simple waltz, and Adelaide found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm. The sheriff was a competent if uninspired dancer, but he was courteous and made polite conversation. When the music ended, he escorted her back to the edge of the room. "Thank you for the dance," Adelaide said sincerely. "My pleasure, miss. Say, have you met the Hendersons yet? They've got twin girls who might benefit from those music lessons you're offering." As the sheriff introduced her to more potential clients, Adelaide felt a sense of cautious optimism growing. Perhaps she could make a place for herself here after all. The evening continued, and Adelaide found herself enjoying the simple pleasures of community gathering. The townsfolk were generally welcoming, curious about the newcomer but not overly intrusive. She had just finished a pleasant conversation with the local schoolteacher when she noticed Matthew Harding enter the hall. He looked different from the previous evening. His clothes were cleaner, his hair combed, though he still maintained that rugged quality that seemed intrinsic to his character. He nodded to various people as he made his way through the crowd, stopping occasionally for brief conversations. When his gaze finally landed on Adelaide, he offered a small but genuine smile of recognition. The band struck up another tune, a lively reel that sent couples spinning around the floor. Adelaide watched with growing longing. Dance had always been her joy, her escape. Before she could reconsider, she found herself moving toward a group of men standing near the band. "Excuse me," she said, addressing a young man who appeared to be without a partner. "Would you care to dance?" The young man looked startled, then glanced at his companions with obvious discomfort. One of them snickered, and another made a comment too low for Adelaide to hear, but the resulting laughter made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. I don't really dance, miss," the young man mumbled, taking a step back. The laughter grew louder, spreading to nearby groups as word of her faux pas circulated. In Boston, it would have been unusual but not scandalous for a woman to request a dance, but clearly, the social rules were different here. Adelaide stood frozen in humiliation, wishing desperately that she could disappear. "I'd be honored to dance with you, Miss Whitaker." The deep voice cut through the laughter, and Adelaide turned to find Matthew Harding standing beside her, his hand extended in invitation. His expression revealed nothing, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of kindness and challenge, that made her heart skip. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with gentle firmness, and he led her onto the dance floor just as the band transitioned to a slower waltz. "Thank you," Adelaide whispered as they took their positions. "Don't mention it," Matthew replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Those boys needed a lesson in manners." As they began to move with the music, Adelaide was surprised by how well he danced. His steps were sure, his lead confident without being controlling. For a man who spent his days on horseback, he moved with remarkable grace. "You dance very well, Mr. Harding," she commented, allowing herself to relax into the rhythm. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Had a mother who insisted her sons learn proper manners, including dancing. Said we'd thank her one day." "And do you? Thank her?" The smile broadened slightly. "I reckon I do, Miss Whitaker. I reckon I do." As they circled the floor, Adelaide became aware that they were drawing attention. The laughter had stopped, replaced by curious glances and whispered conversations. Matthew Harding was clearly someone of standing in the community, and his choice to dance with the newcomer who had just committed a social blunder was not going unnoticed. "Everyone's staring," she murmured, feeling self-conscious. "Let them," he replied calmly. "Folks around here don't get much excitement. They'll find something new to talk about by tomorrow." The music swelled, and Matthew guided her into a graceful turn. His hand was warm against the small of her back, a steady presence that somehow made her feel both protected and exhilarated. "I heard you're giving music lessons," he said as they resumed their circuit of the floor. "Yes, though I've only secured a few students so far. It's a start, at least. My foreman's wife has been looking for someone to teach their daughter. Bright little thing, about 9 years old. I could mention it to them if you're interested." Adelaide's heart lifted at the prospect. "That would be very kind of you, Mr. Harding." "Matthew," he corrected gently. "Or Matt if you prefer. Mr. Harding makes me feel like I should be looking over my shoulder for my father." "Matthew," she repeated, enjoying the way the name felt. "And you must call me Adelaide." As the music drew to a close, Matthew made no move to release her hand. Instead, he held it firmly as he led her from the dance floor, effectively silencing any remaining whispers with his deliberate show of support. "May I get you some punch, Adelaide?" he asked, still holding her hand. "Yes, thank you." As he went to fetch refreshments, Adelaide noticed several women watching her with interest. One of them, a handsome woman in her 40s with silver-streaked dark hair, approached with a warm smile. "You must be Miss Whitaker. I'm Martha Jenkins, the doctor's wife. I understand you're offering music lessons?" "Yes, madam," Adelaide replied, grateful for the friendly overture. "Piano primarily, though I can also teach voice and basic violin." "Wonderful! My daughter Sarah has been begging for piano lessons, but our previous teacher moved to Denver last year. When would you be available to start?" By the time Matthew returned with 2 cups of punch, Adelaide had arranged for another student and was deep in conversation with Mrs. Jenkins about the possibility of organizing a children's recital before Christmas. "I see you've met the town matchmaker," Matthew commented dryly as he handed Adelaide her punch. Mrs. Jenkins laughed good-naturedly. "Pay him no mind, dear. Matthew's just sour because I've been trying to find him a suitable wife for years." "Without success, I notice," Matthew retorted, though his tone was more amused than irritated. "That's because you're impossibly picky," Mrs. Jenkins replied before turning back to Adelaide. "This one turned down Eliza Thompson, and she's the prettiest girl in 3 counties. She giggles," Matthew said simply, as if that explained everything. "Mrs. Jenkins rolled her eyes. "Heaven forbid a young woman should express joy in your presence, Matthew Harding." She patted Adelaide's arm. "I'll call on you tomorrow to discuss Sarah's lessons. Don't let this one scare you off. His bark is worse than his bite." As Mrs. Jenkins moved away to greet other guests, Adelaide couldn't help but smile at the exchange. "She seems lovely." "She is," Matthew agreed. When she's not trying to marry me off to every available woman within 50 miles. Adelaide sipped her punch to hide her amusement. Is that why you rescued me on the dance floor? To thwart her matchmaking efforts by creating a diversion? Matthew's expression sobered. No, Adelaide. I asked you to dance because I wanted to. The simple honesty in his voice caught her off guard, and she found herself momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the band started up again, this time with a lively square dance that had couples quickly forming sets. Would you like to try another? Matthew asked, setting down his empty cup and offering his hand once more. Adelaide hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. I would, thank you. As Matthew led her back to the dance floor, Adelaide couldn't help but notice that he still hadn't let go of her hand. And strangely, she found she didn't mind at all. The dance that followed was considerably more energetic than the waltz, requiring concentration and quick footwork. Adelaide found herself laughing as Matthew guided her through the unfamiliar patterns, his own smile growing more relaxed as the dance progressed. By the time the music ended, she was flushed and breathing heavily, but feeling more alive than she had in months. You're a natural, Matthew commented as they caught their breath. Hardly, Adelaide replied with a laugh. But it's wonderful to dance again. I've missed it. There was plenty of dancing in Boston, I imagine. Yes, though rather different in style. More formal, less. She searched for the right word. Joyful, perhaps. Matthew studied her for a moment. You didn't leave much behind, did you? The perceptive question caught her off guard. No, she admitted softly. After my parents died, there wasn't much to keep me there. Uncle Jasper's letters promised a fresh start. I'm sorry about your uncle. He was a good man. Thank you. I just wish I'd come sooner, had a chance to know him as an adult. They had moved to a quieter corner of the hall, away from the main crowd. Matthew leaned against a supporting beam, his posture relaxed but attentive. Your uncle spoke of you often. Kept your letters in his breast pocket. Read them so many times the paper was wearing thin. Adelaide felt tears threatening at this unexpected glimpse of her uncle's affection. I didn't know. He was proud of you. Said you had spirit? I can see he was right about that. Before Adelaide could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of cowboys had arrived, clearly having visited the saloon before making their appearance at the social. Their loud laughter and unsteady movements indicated they had indulged liberally. Matthew straightened, his relaxed demeanor shifting subtly to alertness. Trouble, he murmured. Sure enough, one of the newcomers spotted Adelaide and nudged his companion, pointing in her direction. The men made their way across the room, ignoring the disapproving looks from the more respectable townsfolk. Well, looky here, the taller of the two slurred as they approached. You must be the fancy Boston lady everyone's talking about. Matthew stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Adelaide and the drunken cowboy. Evening, Tucker. Didn't expect to see you boys here tonight. Free country, Harding, Tucker replied, his gaze sliding past Matthew to Adelaide. Heard the lady here likes to ask men to dance. Thought I'd save her the trouble and offer myself. The lady's spoken for at the moment, Matthew said evenly, though Adelaide could sense the tension in his stance. Tucker's companion, a shorter man with a week's growth of beard, snickered. Didn't take you long to stake your claim, Harding. Guess those rumors about the Ice King melting were true. Adelaide felt her cheeks flush with indignation. Before Matthew could respond, she stepped forward. Mr. Tucker, is it? I appreciate your offer, but I'm quite content with my current company. Perhaps another time, when you're more rested. Tucker's eyes narrowed at the polite rejection. Think you're too good for the likes of me, Boston? That's enough, Tucker. Matthew's voice had hardened. You and Gibbs should head back to the bunkhouse before you say something you'll regret. For a tense moment, it seemed Tucker might push the confrontation further, but Sheriff Caldwell appeared at their side, his expression stern. Everything all right here, folks? Tucker glared at Matthew for another second before backing down with a forced laugh. Just being neighborly, Sheriff. No harm done. He tipped his hat mockingly toward Adelaide. Madam. Welcome to Silverdale. As the cowboys moved away, Adelaide released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Matthew. And you too, Sheriff. Sheriff Caldwell nodded. Those boys work for the Circle T. Good hands when they're sober, but they can be trouble after a few drinks. You all right, Miss Whitaker? Yes, quite all right, Adelaide assured him, though her heart was still beating rapidly. I'll see Miss Whitaker safely back to Mrs. Holcomb's, Matthew told the sheriff. It's getting late. Sheriff Caldwell glanced between them, a speculative look in his eyes. That'd be for the best. Good night, folks. As the sheriff moved away, Adelaide turned to Matthew. You don't need to escort me. I don't want to end your evening early. I've had all the socializing I can stand for one night, Matthew replied with a small smile. Besides, Tucker and his friends might still be hanging around town. I'd feel better seeing you safely home. Adelaide nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his suggestion. They said their goodbyes to various acquaintances, and Matthew helped her with her shawl before offering his arm to lead her outside. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief after the warmth of the crowded hall. Stars blazed overhead in a clarity Adelaide had never seen in Boston, and the street was quiet except for distant piano music drifting from the saloon. It's beautiful here, Adelaide murmured as they walked slowly toward the boarding house. So vast and open. It grows on you, Matthew agreed. Takes some getting used to, though, especially coming from a city. How long have you been in Colorado? Since '68. Came west after the war looking for a fresh start. Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy my own place. The Double H, Adelaide remembered. Matthew nodded. Started small, but I've built it up over the years. Got about 60 head of cattle now, some good horses. It's a decent spread. The pride in his voice was evident but understated. Adelaide sensed there was much more to his story than he was sharing, but she didn't press. They had only just met, after all. And your family? Are they still back east? A shadow crossed Matthew's face. Lost my parents before the war. Had a brother who went to California during the gold rush. Haven't heard from him in years. I'm sorry, Adelaide said softly. It seems we have that in common, being alone. Matthew glanced down at her, his expression softening. Silverdale's a good town, once you get to know it. People look out for each other here. I'm beginning to see that, Adelaide replied, thinking of his kindness on the dance floor, of Mrs. Jenkins' friendly overtures, and even the sheriff's protective presence. They had reached Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house, a neat 2-story building with a small porch. Light glowed from the downstairs windows, indicating the landlady was still awake. Matthew walked Adelaide up the steps but stopped at the door. I'd like to call on you tomorrow, if that would be acceptable. I could show you around town properly, introduce you to some more potential students. Adelaide felt a flutter of anticipation at his offer. I would like that very much. Thank you. He took her hand then, as he had at the dance, but this time he raised it to his lips in a gesture so unexpected and gallant that Adelaide felt her breath catch. His lips were warm against her skin, the brief contact sending a surprising jolt of awareness through her. Good night, Adelaide Whitaker, he said, his voice low and rich in the quiet night. Welcome to your new home. As Adelaide watched him descend the steps and disappear into the darkness, she realized with startling clarity that for the first time since arriving in Silverdale, she truly felt welcome. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she might belong. The following morning dawned clear and bright, with the crisp edge of autumn in the air. Adelaide woke early, a habit ingrained from years of rising to prepare for her teaching duties in Boston. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, she felt a pang of homesickness. But as the events of the previous evening flooded back the dance, Matthew's unexpected kindness, his promise to call on her today, she found herself eager to face the new day. Mrs. Holcomb served a hearty breakfast to her boarders, and Adelaide took the opportunity to learn more about her new home from the garrulous landlady. Silverdale wasn't much more than a mining camp 5 years ago, Mrs. Holcomb explained as she refilled Adelaide's coffee cup. But when they put the railroad through, everything changed. Ranchers started moving in, then families. We've got a proper school now, and Doc Jenkins is talking about expanding his practice. It seems like a town with a future, Adelaide observed. Indeed it is, dear. And a town in need of refinement, if you asked me. These music lessons of yours will be a godsend for the young ones. My Herbert always said culture was what separated civilization from barbarism. Adelaide smiled at the older woman's enthusiasm. Your late husband sounds like a wise man. He was at that, Mrs. Holcomb agreed with a wistful smile. Now, about that gentleman who escorted you home last night. Adelaide felt a blush rising to her cheeks. Mr. Harding was simply being kind. Mrs. Holcomb gave her a knowing look. Matthew Harding doesn't do anything without purpose, my dear. He's respected in these parts, fair in his dealings, generous to those in need, but private. Very private. You're the first woman I've seen him pay particular attention to since he arrived in Silverdale. Before Adelaide could formulate a response to this intriguing information, a knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Holcomb hurried to answer it, returning moments later with a broad smile. Miss Whitaker, you have a visitor. Mr. Harding is waiting in the parlor. Adelaide's heart gave a ridiculous flutter. She smoothed her skirts and checked that her hair was neatly pinned before making her way to the parlor, where she found Matthew examining a collection of porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece. He turned as she entered, and Adelaide was struck again by his presence. In daylight, she could better appreciate the strong lines of his face, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, as he was doing now. Good morning, he greeted her, his voice warm. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Adelaide assured him. I've already had breakfast and was wondering how to occupy my day. I thought we might start with a proper tour of the town, if you're amenable. There's more to Silverdale than what you've seen so far. That sounds wonderful, Adelaide replied, genuinely pleased by the prospect. Let me fetch my shawl and bonnet. When she returned, Matthew offered his arm with the same easy courtesy he had shown the night before. As they stepped out onto the street, Adelaide was conscious of curious glances from passers-by, but Matthew seemed unconcerned by the attention. People are staring again, she murmured. Matthew's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Small town. Not much happens here that doesn't become everyone's business by sundown. And is escorting a newcomer around town something that will be discussed over supper tables tonight? Probably, he admitted. Especially since I haven't shown much interest in the local social scene until now. The implication that she was somehow different, special enough to draw him out of his usual reserve, sent a pleasant warmth through Adelaide's chest. Mrs. Holcomb mentioned you keep to yourself. Did she now? Matthew raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Holcomb has a tendency to embellish. She also called you respected and fair, Adelaide added quickly. Well, that's something, at least. The amusement in his voice told her he wasn't truly offended by the landlady's assessment. They walked along the main street, Matthew pointing out businesses and introducing Adelaide to shopkeepers and residents they encountered. Everyone seemed to know him, greeting him with varying degrees of respect and familiarity. Adelaide was struck by the way he seemed to remember something personal about each person, asking after a sick child, commenting on a recent cattle sale, inquiring about a relative back east. You know everyone, she observed as they left the general store, where Matthew had arranged for Adelaide's name to be added to his account until she was more established. It's a small community, he replied modestly. And knowing your neighbors is important out here. Winter storms, Indian troubles, drought, we all depend on each other when times get hard. As they continued their tour, Adelaide began to get a clearer picture of Silverdale. The town was growing, as Mrs. Holcomb had said, but it still retained the rawness of the frontier. Alongside the neat clapboard buildings of the main street were hastily constructed wooden structures, canvas-topped wagons that served as temporary homes for newcomers, and the ever-present saloons that catered to cowboys and miners. "It's so different from Boston," Adelaide commented as they paused to watch a cattle drive moving slowly down a side street toward the stockyards. "Better or worse?" Matthew asked, studying her expression. Adelaide considered the question seriously. "Different," she repeated. "In Boston, everything felt settled, predetermined. Here, it feels like anything might happen. That's what drew me west," Matthew admitted. "The possibility. No one cares who your family was or what mistakes you made before. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his past." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, but again, Adelaide didn't press. Whatever ghosts Matthew Harding carried, they were his to share when and if he chose. Their tour eventually led them to a modest building set slightly apart from the main street, with a hand-painted sign that read, "Silverdale School." "Thought you might want to meet Miss Cooper," Matthew explained. "She's the schoolteacher, teaches about 30 children from 6 to 16. She's been trying to incorporate music into her lessons but doesn't have the training herself." The schoolhouse was empty, it being Saturday, but they found Miss Cooper in the small attached living quarters where she resided. She was a brisk, practical woman in her 30s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Adelaide immediately respected. "Music lessons would be a godsend," Miss Cooper declared after introductions had been made and Adelaide's qualifications discussed. "I've been making do with rhythm exercises and simple singing, but these children deserve more. Especially with winter coming on, they need indoor activities that engage their minds. I'd be happy to work with you," Adelaide offered. "Perhaps we could arrange for me to visit the school once or twice a week?" By the time they left the schoolhouse, Adelaide had secured another regular source of income and was filled with excited plans for how to approach teaching music to such a diverse group of students. "You're good with people," Matthew observed as they walked back toward the center of town. "Natural teacher, I'd guess." Adelaide smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I've always loved sharing music with others. There's something magical about watching someone connect with a piece for the first time, seeing that spark of understanding and joy." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "My mother felt the same way about books. Used to read to us every night, no matter how tired she was from working the farm. Said stories could take you places your feet never could." "She sounds wonderful," Adelaide said softly. "She was." A shadow passed over his face, quickly suppressed. "Are you hungry? Miller's Cafe does a decent midday meal." Adelaide recognized the change of subject for what it was and accepted it gracefully. "I am rather hungry, actually." Miller's Cafe was a simple establishment but clean and welcoming. The proprietor, Mrs. Miller, greeted Matthew warmly, and showed them to a table by the window. As they settled in, Adelaide became aware of subtle glances and whispered conversations from other diners. "Is it always going to be like this?" she asked quietly after they had ordered. "Everyone watching and speculating?" Matthew's expression was wry. "For a while, probably. Until something more interesting comes along." He paused, considering. "Does it bother you? Being seen with me?" "No," Adelaide answered honestly. "I'm just not accustomed to being the subject of such interest. In Boston, I was practically invisible, just another unmarried teacher trying to make ends meet. Hard to imagine you being invisible anywhere," Matthew commented, and though his tone was casual, there was something in his gaze that made Adelaide's cheeks warm. Their meal arrived, interrupting the moment hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread that reminded Adelaide she'd had little appetite since arriving in Silverdale. As they ate, the conversation turned to more practical matters: potential students, arrangements for lessons, the approaching winter. "First snow usually comes by late October," Matthew told her. "Not usually heavy until December, but it's best to be prepared early. Winters can be harsh here. I'll need to find more permanent housing before then," Adelaide mused. "Mrs. Holcomb's is lovely, but I can't afford to board indefinitely, and I need space for a piano if I'm to teach properly." Matthew was quiet for a moment, seeming to debate something internally. "There's a small cottage on the edge of town," he finally said. "Used to belong to the previous schoolteacher before Miss Cooper took over. It's been sitting empty for almost a year now. Nothing fancy, but solid construction, has a decent stove, and there'd be room for a piano." "That sounds perfect," Adelaide said eagerly. "Who owns it now? Do you think they'd be willing to rent to me?" "I own it," Matthew replied, watching her reaction carefully. "Bought it along with some other properties when land was cheap after a bad winter a few years back. You're welcome to use it for as reasonable a rent as your pride will allow." Adelaide was taken aback by the offer. "That's incredibly generous, Matthew." "It's sitting empty otherwise," he pointed out practically. "And it would benefit the town to have a proper music teacher established here. The children need culture, like Mrs. Holcomb says." Adelaide couldn't help but smile at his echo of the landlady's sentiments. "Still, I wouldn't want to impose or accept charity." "It's not charity to pay a fair rent for a property that suits your needs," Matthew countered. "And I'd consider it a personal favor if you take it. The place needs someone living in it, caring for it." Put that way, it was hard to refuse, especially given her limited options. "I'd like to see it first, if that's possible." "Of course. We can go after we finish eating if you'd like." The cottage, as it turned out, was perfect, small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy parlor that could accommodate a piano, and a kitchen with a reliable stove. It sat on the eastern edge of town, close enough to be convenient for students coming for lessons but with enough distance to provide some privacy. A small garden, now overgrown, occupied the backyard. "It needs some work," Matthew acknowledged as they toured the property. "Cleaning, minor repairs. I can arrange to have it ready within a week, if you decide you want it." Adelaide moved to the window, looking out at the mountains visible in the distance. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." When she turned back to Matthew, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Then it's yours," he said simply. "We can discuss terms later." As they walked back toward town, Adelaide felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Everything was happening so quickly: the move to Silverdale, meeting Matthew, finding a place to live and work. It was exhilarating and frightening all at once. "You look troubled," Matthew observed, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Adelaide hesitated, uncertain how to express her jumbled emotions. "Not troubled exactly. Just overwhelmed, perhaps. Yesterday morning I arrived in town to discover my uncle dead and my plans in ruins. Now, barely a day later, I have students, a position at the school, and a home. Having second thoughts?" His voice was neutral, but Adelaide sensed her answer mattered to him. "No," she said firmly. "Surprised by how quickly things are falling into place, but not second-guessing. It feels right being here." She glanced up at him. "You've been extraordinarily kind, Matthew. I'm not sure how to properly thank you." "No thanks necessary," he replied with characteristic simplicity. "Though." He hesitated, then continued with a hint of uncertainty that was endearing in such a self-possessed man. "I would like to call on you again. Properly, I mean. If that would be acceptable." Adelaide felt a flutter of pleasure at his formal request. "I would like that very much." They had reached Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house, and Matthew stopped at the foot of the steps. "I have business to attend to tomorrow, ranch matters, but perhaps Monday evening? I could escort you to dinner at the hotel." "Monday would be lovely," Adelaide agreed, conscious of a warm glow of anticipation spreading through her chest. This time, when Matthew took her hand to bid her farewell, he held it a moment longer than strictly necessary, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles in a gesture that seemed both deliberate and unconscious. "Until Monday, then," he said softly before releasing her and turning to leave. Adelaide watched him go, aware that something significant had shifted between them. What had begun as a chance encounter was quickly becoming something more, something that both excited and frightened her with its potential. Sunday passed quietly, with Adelaide attending church services and meeting more members of the community. Several more parents approached her about music lessons, and by the end of the day, she had enough prospective students to ensure a modest but steady income. Mrs. Jenkins called as promised to arrange lessons for her daughter, bringing with her a basket of preserves and fresh bread as a welcome gift. "Matthew Harding's not a man to act impulsively," Mrs. Jenkins commented as they finalized the details of young Sarah's lesson schedule. "So when he takes an interest in something or someone, people notice." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Harding has been very kind in helping me get established here, that's all." Mrs. Jenkins' knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by Adelaide's attempt at nonchalance. "Of course, dear. Just know that Matthew is well respected in these parts. His good opinion carries weight." The conversation left Adelaide with much to think about. It was becoming increasingly clear that Matthew's attention had marked her as someone of interest to the community, a double-edged sword that provided both opportunity and scrutiny. Monday morning brought an unexpected delivery to Mrs. Holcomb's, a small but well-maintained upright piano, delivered by two men from the general store with a note that simply read, "For your temporary use until you're settled in the cottage. M.H." "Well," Mrs. Holcomb exclaimed, watching as the men positioned the instrument in the parlor, "if that isn't the most romantic gesture I've seen in years." Adelaide was speechless, torn between delight at the thoughtful gift and concern over the impropriety of accepting such a valuable loan. When the delivery men had gone, she sat at the instrument, running her fingers lightly over the keys. It had been well cared for, the action smooth and the tone warm. She spent the morning playing, losing herself in the familiar comfort of music. The joy of it brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had missed having a piano at her fingertips, how integral it was to her sense of self. By mid-afternoon, word had spread through town that the new music teacher was playing at Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house. Adelaide looked up from the keys to find several people had gathered on the porch, listening through the open windows. Rather than being embarrassed, she felt a surge of pleasure at their appreciation, and continued playing with renewed energy. When she finally stopped, tired but happy, there was a smattering of applause from her impromptu audience. Mrs. Holcomb appeared at the parlor door, beaming with pride as if Adelaide's performance reflected well on her establishment. "You've made quite an impression, my dear," the landlady informed her. "And not just with your music. The whole town is talking about Matthew Harding's piano." Adelaide sighed, recognizing the inevitability of gossip in a small community. "It's merely a loan, Mrs. Holcomb. A kind gesture to help me begin teaching." "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Holcomb replied, her tone making it clear she believed there was more to it. "Now you'd best start getting ready for your dinner engagement. These things take time, and Mr. Harding will be calling for you at 6. Despite her mild irritation at the landlady's matchmaking enthusiasm, Adelaide found herself taking unusual care with her appearance that evening. She wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that brought out the warm tones in her chestnut hair, and arranged her hair in a style that was elegant without being overly formal. When Matthew arrived precisely at 6, his appreciative gaze made the effort worthwhile. He too had dressed with care, wearing a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the directness of the compliment leaving no room for doubt about his sincerity. "Thank you," Adelaide replied, feeling suddenly shy. "And thank you for the piano. It's a remarkable gift." "It's just a loan," Matthew corrected her, echoing her earlier words to Mrs. Holcomb. "But I'm glad it pleases you. Ready for dinner?" The Silverdale Hotel was the most sophisticated establishment in town, with white tablecloths, proper silverware, and a small but well-trained staff. As Matthew escorted Adelaide to a table by the window, she was again conscious of curious glances, but they bothered her less now that she was beginning to recognize faces and understand the dynamics of the small community. Conversation flowed easily between them as they dined. Adelaide found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Boston, of her parents, and the life they had built, of her struggles after their deaths. Matthew listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. When it came to his own past, however, he remained more reserved. He spoke of his ranch, of his plans for expansion, of the challenges and rewards of building something from nothing. But of his life before coming to Colorado, he said little beyond general outlines. "You mentioned serving in the war," Adelaide ventured as they finished their meal. "That must have been difficult." A shadow crossed Matthew's face, and for a moment, Adelaide thought she had overstepped. But then he nodded slowly. "It was. Joined up in '62, served with the 20th Massachusetts. Saw things no man should see." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken pain. Adelaide reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. "I'm sorry," she said softly, knowing the words were inadequate but offering them nonetheless. Matthew turned his hand to clasp hers, his grip warm and firm. "It was a long time ago," he said quietly. "But it changes a man, seeing that kind of suffering. Makes you value peace, simple pleasures." The moment stretched between them, intimate despite their public setting. Adelaide felt a connection forming, deeper than mere attraction or shared interests, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both known loss and emerged resilient. Finally, Matthew released her hand with apparent reluctance. "Would you care for dessert? Mrs. Green makes an excellent apple pie." The shift back to lighter conversation was welcome, and Adelaide accepted gracefully. As they enjoyed their dessert, Matthew spoke of his plans for the ranch, the new breeding stock he had recently acquired, his hopes for expanding his horse operation. "Cattle are steady money," he explained, "but horses are my passion. There's something about working with a good horse, building that trust and partnership, that satisfies something in the soul. You should hear yourself," Adelaide commented with a smile. "That's exactly how I feel about music." Matthew looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I hadn't considered the parallel, but you're right. It's about connection, isn't it? Finding something that speaks to you on a level beyond words." "Exactly," Adelaide agreed, pleased by his understanding. "When I play, especially pieces I know well, it's like a conversation with an old friend. The notes are familiar, but they can still surprise you, reveal new depths if you're paying attention." As the evening drew to a close, Adelaide found herself reluctant to see it end. There was an ease in Matthew's company that she had rarely experienced, a sense that she could be fully herself without judgment or pretense. When he escorted her back to Mrs. Holcomb's, the night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked slowly, either seeming eager to reach their destination. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Adelaide said as they reached the boarding-house steps. "The pleasure was mine," Matthew replied, his voice low in the quiet night. He hesitated, then added, "I'll be busy at the ranch for the next few days, fall roundup, preparing for winter. But I'd like to see you again when I return to town." "I'd like that too," Adelaide admitted. Matthew took her hand, and for a moment, Adelaide thought he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her fingers to his lips as he had that first night, his eyes holding hers in the dim light from the windows. "Good night, Adelaide," he murmured against her skin. "Good night, Matthew," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she watched him walk away, Adelaide acknowledged to herself what she had been reluctant to admit: she was falling for Matthew Harding, falling hard and fast. And judging by the way he had looked at her tonight, the feeling might well be mutual. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Adelaide began giving lessons on the piano Matthew had provided, finding joy in sharing her knowledge with eager students. She visited the school 3 times, working with Miss Cooper to incorporate music into the curriculum. And she spent every free moment preparing for her move to the cottage, which Matthew had arranged to have cleaned and repaired as promised. True to his word, Matthew remained at his ranch, though he sent notes, with various delivery men checking on her progress and updating her on the repairs to the cottage. Each brief message was a reminder of his thoughtfulness, of the connection that had begun to form between them. By Saturday, the cottage was ready for occupation. Adelaide had acquired a few necessary pieces of furniture: a bed, a table and chairs, a small sofa from various townspeople eager to help the new music teacher get established. Matthew had arranged for the piano to be moved from Mrs. Holcomb's, placing it in the parlor where the light was best. As Adelaide unpacked her few belongings in her new home, she felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. The cottage already felt more like home than her rented room in Boston ever had. There was something about the simple, solid structure, the way the afternoon light filtered through the curtainless windows, the distant view of mountains from the back garden, that spoke to her soul. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Opening it, she found Matthew standing on her small porch, his hat in his hands and a slightly uncertain expression on his face. "Matthew!" she exclaimed, genuinely delighted to see him. "I wasn't expecting you back in town until tomorrow. Finished up early," he explained, his expression warming at her welcome. "Wanted to make sure everything was in order with the cottage." "It's perfect," Adelaide assured him, stepping back to invite him in. "Absolutely perfect. I can't thank you enough." Matthew entered, his gaze taking in the changes she had already made: the shawl draped over the sofa, the books arranged on a small shelf, the vase of wildflowers on the table. "Looks like you're settling in." "Yes, though I still need curtains and a few other essentials. But it already feels like home." Matthew nodded, seeming pleased by her assessment. "Brought you something," he said, reaching into his coat pocket and withdrawing a small wrapped package. "A housewarming gift." Adelaide accepted the package with surprise and curiosity. Unwrapping it carefully, she found a beautifully crafted wooden music box. When she opened the lid, a sweet, simple melody began to play. "Beautiful Dreamer," one of her favorite songs. "Matthew," she breathed, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gift. "How did you know?" "You were playing it the other day at Mrs. Holcomb's," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed by her emotional reaction. "Thought you might like something of your own, something beautiful for your new home." Adelaide looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's the most perfect gift anyone has ever given me." The music box continued its gentle melody as they stood in the small parlor, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the wooden floor. There was something in Matthew's expression, a tenderness mixed with uncertainty, that made Adelaide's heart beat faster. "Adelaide," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I—" A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Adelaide reluctantly set down the music box and went to answer it, finding Sheriff Caldwell standing on her porch with a grim expression. "Miss Whitaker," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Sorry to disturb you. Is Harding here?" "Saw his horse outside." Matthew appeared at Adelaide's shoulder. "What is it, Sheriff?" "Trouble at the Broken Spoke," Caldwell replied tersely. "Tucker and his boys are causing a ruckus, threatening to burn down Miller's place over some imagined slight. Could use your help calming things down before someone gets hurt." Matthew's expression hardened. "I'll come right away." He turned to Adelaide, his manner softening slightly. "I'm sorry. We'll continue our conversation another time." "Of course," Adelaide replied, though she couldn't help feeling disappointed by the interruption. "Be careful." Matthew nodded, then surprised her by leaning down to place a quick, gentle kiss on her cheek. "Lock your doors," he instructed quietly before following the sheriff down the path. Adelaide watched them go, her fingers unconsciously touching the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. Whatever Matthew had been about to say, it had seemed important, significant. Now she would have to wait to hear it. As instructed, she locked her doors and continued unpacking, though her mind kept returning to the moment before the sheriff's arrival. The music box sat on the parlor table, a tangible reminder of Matthew's thoughtfulness, of the connection growing between them. Night fell, and Adelaide prepared for bed in her new home, feeling both excited about this new chapter in her life and anxious about Matthew's safety. The disturbance at the saloon had sounded potentially dangerous, and though she knew Matthew was more than capable of handling himself, she couldn't help worrying. She had just extinguished her lamp when a soft knock sounded at her door. Cautiously she approached, calling out, "Who is it?" "It's Matthew," came the reply, his voice instantly recognizable. Adelaide quickly lit a lamp and opened the door to find Matthew standing on her porch, looking tired but unharmed. "Is everything all right? What happened at the saloon?" "Everything's fine now," he assured her, though there was tension in his stance. "Tucker and his friends are spending the night in jail to cool off. No one was seriously hurt." "I'm glad," Adelaide said sincerely, then hesitated. "Would you like to come in?" "I know it's late, but no," Matthew interrupted gently. "It wouldn't be proper, not at this hour. I just wanted to make sure you were safe, and to apologize for leaving so abruptly earlier." "There's no need to apologize," Adelaide assured him. "You were needed elsewhere." Matthew's expression softened as he looked at her, standing in the doorway with lamplight gilding her hair. "You were about to say something," Adelaide prompted softly. "Before the sheriff arrived." Matthew took a deep breath, seeming to come to a decision. "I was going to say that I care for you, Adelaide. More than I expected to, and certainly more quickly than I thought possible. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel a connection with you that I've never felt with anyone else." The simple, direct declaration took Adelaide's breath away. In Boston, courtship was a formal, often prolonged affair, with feelings carefully concealed behind proper behavior and societal expectations. Matthew's honesty was both startling and refreshing. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "This connection. It's unexpected, but it feels right." Matthew's smile in response was worth every moment of uncertainty she had felt since arriving in Silverdale. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "May I kiss you, Adelaide?" "Properly this time." Her heart hammering in her chest, Adelaide nodded. Matthew cupped her face gently in his hands, his touch reverent, and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. It was brief, appropriate for a porch in full view of anyone who might be passing, but it left Adelaide feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. When Matthew pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I should go," he said, though his reluctance was evident in his tone. "But I'd like to call on you tomorrow, if that would be acceptable." "Yes," Adelaide replied simply, still slightly dazed from the kiss. "Tomorrow." Matthew brushed his thumb lightly across her cheek before stepping back. "Good night, Adelaide. Sweet dreams." As Adelaide watched him walk away for the third time since meeting him, she realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Matthew Harding. And based on the way he had looked at her tonight, the feeling was entirely mutual. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm to Adelaide's life in Silverdale. Her teaching practice grew, with students ranging from young children taking their first lessons to adults seeking to refine skills learned in their youth. The position at the school proved rewarding, with even the most reluctant students showing interest in her musical instruction. And her cottage became truly her own, with curtains at the windows, a small vegetable garden planted for spring, and the constant presence of music filling its rooms. Throughout it all, Matthew was a steady, supportive presence. He called on her regularly, escorting her to social events, joining her for meals, and sometimes simply sitting in her parlor in the evenings, listening as she played the piano. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised Adelaide, who was accustomed to the more formal, constrained relationships of Boston society. "It's different here," Mrs. Jenkins explained when Adelaide confided her surprise at the speed with which her relationship with Matthew was developing. "Out west, people don't have the luxury of long courtships. Life is harder, more uncertain. When you find someone who suits you, you hold on tight." October brought the first snow, earlier than usual according to the locals. Adelaide woke one morning to find the world transformed, a pristine blanket of white covering the ground and weighing down the branches of the pine trees visible from her window. The sight was breathtaking, like something from a fairy tale. A knock at her door revealed Matthew, his hat and shoulders dusted with snow, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Thought you might like to see the mountains after the first snow," he said by way of greeting. "If you're not too busy with lessons today." Adelaide's only scheduled student had already sent word that they wouldn't be able to make it due to the weather. "I'd love to," she replied, already reaching for her heaviest cloak. "Just give me a moment to get ready." Matthew had brought his buggy, now fitted with runners for the snow. As they drove out of town, Adelaide marveled at the transformed landscape. The mountains that had been merely a distant backdrop to her life now stood in sharp relief against the blue sky, their slopes glistening white in the morning sun. "It's magnificent," she breathed, taking in the vast, pristine beauty of the scene. "I've never seen anything like it." Matthew guided the horse along a well-packed trail that climbed gradually into the foothills. "Wait until we reach the lookout point," he promised. "You can see for miles." The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, the latter now bare of leaves but elegant in their stark simplicity against the snow. Occasionally, they startled deer or smaller wildlife, the creatures bounding away through the deep drifts at their approach. When they finally reached the lookout Matthew had mentioned, Adelaide was speechless with awe. Spread before them was a panoramic view of the valley, with Silverdale, a small cluster of buildings in the distance, surrounded by white plains that stretched to the horizon, broken only by the dark ribbon of the river and occasional clusters of trees. "This is why I stayed," Matthew said quietly, watching her reaction to the vista. "First time I saw this view, I knew I'd found home." Adelaide turned to look at him, struck by the simple statement, and all it revealed about this complex man. "It's perfect," she agreed softly. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, absorbing the breathtaking scene. Then Matthew reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, his voice unusually hesitant. "I've been carrying it around for days, waiting for the right moment." Adelaide accepted the package with curiosity, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a small box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a silver brooch shaped like a musical note, with a small pearl set into the curve of the design. "Matthew," she breathed, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gift. "It's beautiful. It reminded me of you," he explained, watching her face closely. "Beautiful, elegant, musical." Adelaide lifted the brooch from its box, the silver catching the winter sunlight. "Will you help me put it on?" Matthew took the brooch from her fingers and carefully pinned it to the front of her cloak, his movements gentle and precise despite the size of his hands. When he finished, he didn't step back immediately, instead remaining close enough that Adelaide could feel the warmth of his breath in the cold air. "Adelaide," he began, his voice low and serious. "I know this may seem sudden by Eastern standards, but out here, life moves at a different pace." He took a deep breath, his gaze steady on hers. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night at the dance, when you showed more courage and dignity than anyone in that room." Adelaide felt her heart swell with emotion, a joy so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too, Matthew," she whispered, the words forming clouds in the cold air between them. The smile that transformed his face was worth every hardship she had endured to reach this moment. He cupped her face in his gloved hands, his touch gentle despite the rough leather. "I don't have much to offer except my heart and my home," he said softly. "But both are yours if you'll have them." Adelaide knew what he was asking, even without the formal words. "Yes," she replied simply, certainty filling her voice. "Yes, Matthew, I'll have them both." His kiss was reverent at first, a sealing of their promise, but it quickly deepened into something more passionate. Adelaide melted into his embrace, her arms wrapping around his neck as she returned his fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with more than just the cold. "We should get you back to town before you freeze," Matthew murmured, though he made no immediate move to release her. Adelaide laughed, feeling lightheaded with happiness. "I've never felt warmer in my life." They returned to the buggy hand in hand, the vast landscape before them somehow more beautiful now that they were seeing it together, with the promise of a shared future stretching before them like the untouched snow. News of their engagement spread through Silverdale with predictable speed. Adelaide found herself the recipient of numerous congratulations, small gifts, and not a few knowing looks from those like Mrs. Holcomb and Mrs. Jenkins who had predicted the match from the beginning. "Told you Matthew Harding wasn't one to wait once he made up his mind, Mrs. Jenkins declared smugly when she called on Adelaide the day after the announcement. "And a winter wedding will be just the thing to lift everyone's spirits during the dark months." Adelaide and Matthew had indeed agreed on a December wedding, seeing no reason to delay now that they had found each other. The intervening weeks were filled with preparations both for the ceremony itself and for Adelaide's move to the Double H Ranch afterward. Matthew brought her to the ranch several times during those weeks, showing her the comfortable main house he had built with his own hands, the sturdy barn and corrals, the bunkhouse where his ranch hands lived. Each visit made the reality of their future together more tangible, more exciting. The ranch hands, initially shy around their boss's intended bride, soon warmed to Adelaide, especially after she brought her portable harmonium on one visit and led them in singing folk songs and hymns around the fireplace in the bunkhouse. "You've bewitched a lot of them," Matthew commented with amusement as they drove back to town that evening. "Old Jake was actually smiling. I didn't think his face could still make that shape." Adelaide laughed, nestling closer to his side in the buggy. "They're good men. I like them. They like you too," Matthew replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "As does everyone in Silverdale, it seems. Do you know Mrs. Green is insisting on baking our wedding cake herself? And Doc Jenkins has offered to host the reception at their home. It's overwhelming sometimes," Adelaide admitted. "All this generosity and acceptance. I've never experienced anything like it." "That's Silverdale," Matthew said simply. "It's why I chose to settle here, build my life here." He paused, then added more softly, "Start our family here." The mention of family sent a warm flutter through Adelaide's chest. They had spoken of children, of course both wanted them, hoped for them, but the casual reference to their shared future still had the power to move her deeply. As December approached, Adelaide found herself increasingly busy. In addition to her regular teaching duties and wedding preparations, she had taken on the task of organizing a Christmas concert featuring her students. The event was to be held at the church the week before her wedding, and the entire town was looking forward to it with enthusiasm. One evening, as she was working on arrangements for the concert, a knock at her cottage door revealed Matthew, looking unusually serious. "What is it?" she asked immediately, concern flooding her at his expression. "Has something happened?" "Nothing bad," he assured her quickly. "But I need to talk to you about something important." He entered the cottage, removing his hat and coat with methodical movements that suggested he was gathering his thoughts. Adelaide waited, a flicker of unease disturbing her usual calm. Matthew had never been anything but open with her, but there was something in his manner tonight that suggested difficulty. When they were seated by the fire, Matthew took her hands in his expression solemn. "Before we marry, there are things you should know about me, about my past. Things I haven't spoken of to anyone in Silverdale." Adelaide squeezed his hands encouragingly. "Whatever it is, Matthew, it won't change how I feel about you." He smiled faintly at that. "I hope that's true." Taking a deep breath, he began. "I told you I served with the 20th Massachusetts during the war. What I didn't tell you is that I was an officer, a captain by the end. Or that my family name isn't Harding." Adelaide blinked in surprise but remained silent, giving him space to continue. "My name is Matthew Harrison Blackwood. My family owned one of the largest shipping companies in Boston." He watched her face carefully as he revealed this. "The same Boston you came from." "Blackwood Shipping," Adelaide murmured, recognition dawning. "But during the war, there was a scandal. Something about profiteering, selling supplies to both sides." Matthew nodded grimly. "My father and older brother. They saw the war as a business opportunity. When I discovered what they were doing, I confronted them. They denied everything, of course. I was already serving by then, had seen the suffering firsthand. Knew what those diverted supplies meant to the men fighting and dying. His voice had grown tight with old anger and pain. I threatened to expose them. My father disowned me on the spot, said I was dead to him. Adelaide's heart ached for the young man he had been, forced to choose between family loyalty and his own moral compass. That's why you came west after the war. Why you changed your name. Yes, Matthew admitted. I couldn't bear to stay in Boston, couldn't stand to see my family continue to prosper after what they'd done. And I couldn't stomach the idea of benefiting from their money, tainted as it was. So I walked away from everything, my name, my inheritance, the life I'd been raised to lead. That must have been incredibly difficult, Adelaide said softly, understanding now the shadows that sometimes crossed his face when the past was mentioned. Matthew's grip on her hands tightened slightly. The hardest thing I'd ever done, until now. Because now I have to face the possibility that you might look at me differently, knowing I concealed this from you. Adelaide freed one hand to touch his face gently. Matthew Harding or Matthew Blackwood, the name doesn't matter to me. The man does. The man who helped a stranger when she was humiliated on a dance floor. The man who saw value in teaching music to frontier children. The man who rebuilt his life according to his own principles rather than taking the easier path. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. That's the man I fell in love with. That's the man I'm going to marry. The tension seemed to flow out of Matthew at her words. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close as if she were something infinitely precious. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. Yes, you do, Adelaide replied firmly. We deserve each other, and the happiness we've found together. When Matthew kissed her then, it was with a new depth of emotion, a mingling of relief and gratitude, and love that left them both breathless. Later, as they sat by the fire talking of smaller things, Adelaide could sense a new lightness in him, as if the sharing of his long-held secret had removed a burden he had carried too long. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. The Christmas concert was a resounding success, with Adelaide's students performing admirably to an appreciative audience of proud parents and townspeople. Snow continued to fall intermittently, transforming Silverdale into a winter wonderland that seemed perfectly suited to the festive season and the upcoming nuptials. On the morning of her wedding day, Adelaide woke to clear blue skies and brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. Mrs. Holcomb and Mrs. Jenkins arrived early to help her prepare, bringing with them a beautiful bouquet of hothouse flowers that had been specially ordered from Denver for the occasion. Something old, Mrs. Holcomb declared, presenting Adelaide with a delicate lace handkerchief. This belonged to my grandmother. I carried it at my own wedding. Something new, Mrs. Jenkins added, offering a pair of soft leather gloves lined with rabbit fur. For those cold mornings at the ranch. Adelaide was deeply touched by their kindness, by the way these women who had been strangers mere months ago had embraced her so completely. Thank you both, she said sincerely. For everything. The church was filled to capacity when Adelaide arrived, escorted by Sheriff Caldwell, who had volunteered to give her away in the absence of family. As she stood at the back of the church, preparing to walk down the aisle, she caught her first glimpse of Matthew waiting at the altar. He was dressed in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his posture straight and proud. But it was his expression that caught at her heart, a mixture of awe and joy and love so powerful it seemed to illuminate him from within. The music began, one of her students playing the wedding march on the church's small organ, and Adelaide started her walk toward her future. The faces of the townsfolk blurred around her as she focused on Matthew, on the life they were about to begin together. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the rightness of it overwhelmed her. This was where she belonged, with this man, in this town that had welcomed her when she had nothing. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They had written their own vows, promises to love and honor and cherish that came from the heart rather than tradition. When Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had been his mother's, Adelaide felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. "You may kiss your bride." Matthew's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a sealing of their commitment before God and community. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the cheers and applause that greeted them reflected the genuine affection in which they were held. The reception at the Jenkins home was joyous and lively, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the entire town twice over. Adelaide found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, receiving congratulations and advice and welcomes to married life. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Harding?" Matthew's voice at her ear sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. The new name still felt strange, wonderful in its newness. "Always," she replied, taking his offered hand. As he led her onto the makeshift dance floor in the Jenkins parlor, Adelaide was struck by the symmetry of the moment. Their relationship had begun with a dance, was now being celebrated with another. But how different things were now, how far they had come from that first tentative waltz. "Happy?" Matthew asked softly as they moved together to the music. Adelaide looked up at him, at this man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined that day she stepped off the stagecoach. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And you?" The smile that transformed his face was answer enough, but he added, "More than I ever thought possible." Later, as they prepared to leave the reception for the ranch that would now be their home, Adelaide found herself surrounded by the women of Silverdale, offering final bits of advice and good wishes. Mrs. Holcomb pressed a small package into her hands with a wink, whispering, "For later, dear. Every bride needs something special for her wedding night." Adelaide blushed but accepted the gift with a grateful smile. The women's frank discussions of marriage had been a far cry from the veiled hints and nervous silence that typically surrounded the subject in Boston society, and she appreciated their practical advice and good humor. Matthew was waiting by the door, their bags already loaded in the sleigh that would take them to the Double H. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting down in the early evening darkness. "Ready to go home?" he asked, helping her with her cloak. "Home." The word filled Adelaide with warmth. "Yes," she replied simply, taking his arm. They said their final goodbyes amidst cheers and well wishes, stepping out into the snowy evening as husband and wife. The sleigh was waiting, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, the horses stamping impatiently in the cold. As they settled beneath the heavy fur robes, Matthew drew Adelaide close against his side, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her hands. Adelaide opened it carefully, gasping softly when a delicate gold locket slid into her palm. The front was engraved with their initials, intertwined in an elegant design. "Open it," Matthew encouraged. Inside was a tiny portrait of Matthew on one side, and on the other, a lock of his hair woven into an intricate knot. "It's beautiful," Adelaide whispered, deeply moved by the romantic gesture. "Will you help me put it on?" Matthew fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin despite the cold air. "Something to keep me close to your heart," he murmured. "You're already there," Adelaide replied, turning to meet his gaze. "You have been since the moment you took my hand on that dance floor." His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as the knowledge that they were now husband and wife, free to express their love without restraint, swept through them. It was only the cold and the public street that kept them from completely losing themselves in the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Matthew's eyes were dark with desire. "We should go," he said, his voice husky. "Before I forget we're still in the middle of town." Adelaide laughed, feeling a heady mixture of love and desire and anticipation. "Take me home, husband." The journey to the ranch passed in a comfortable blend of conversation and companionable silence, with occasional stops for kisses that grew increasingly heated as they neared their destination. By the time they arrived at the Double H, the main house was warm and welcoming, lamps lit in the windows and a fire blazing in the hearth, the ranch hand's wedding gift to their boss and his new bride. Matthew carried Adelaide across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down gently in what was now their home. The house seemed different somehow, transformed by her presence, by the knowledge that this was the beginning of their life together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harding," Matthew said softly, his arms still around her waist. Adelaide looked up at him, at this man who had become her husband, her partner, her love. "I like the sound of that," she replied, stretching up to kiss him once more. As the snow continued to fall outside, wrapping their home in a blanket of pristine white, Adelaide and Matthew began their married life together, a life that had started with a simple request to dance and the courage to take a chance on love. 5 years later, Adelaide sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Matthew taught their 4-year-old son, James, how to groom a gentle old mare. The boy's serious expression as he carefully brushed the horse's coat was so like his father's that it made Adelaide smile. Beside her in a small cradle, their 6-month-old daughter, Grace, slept peacefully, her tiny hand curled around a wooden rattle. The Double H had prospered in the years since their marriage. Matthew's breeding program had produced horses sought after throughout the territory, and the cattle operation had expanded significantly. The main house had grown as well, with additional rooms built to accommodate their growing family. Adelaide continued to teach music, though now students came to the ranch for lessons rather than her traveling into town. She had also established a small but respected choir at the church and organized regular concerts that had become highlights of Silverdale's social calendar. Life wasn't always easy. There had been harsh winters, drought summers, the typical challenges of ranching life. But through it all, their partnership had remained strong, their love deepening with each passing year. "Mama, look!" James called excitedly. "I'm doing it right!" "I see, sweetheart," Adelaide called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Matthew looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after all these years, held pride and love in equal measure, pride in their son, love for the family they had built together. As she returned his smile, Adelaide reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman who had arrived in Silverdale with nothing but hope, to the confident wife and mother she was now. It had all begun with a simple question: "Would you care to dance?" And a man who had taken her hand and never let go. She wouldn't change a single step of the dance that had led them here, to this perfect moment in the life they had created together.